Hi, today we are talking about section 8.4, absolute value. The absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and 0 on a number line. The absolute value of a number a is written as absolute value of a. So when you see these two straight lines, that means you are finding the absolute value of that number. It's also important to note that distance cannot be negative. For example, if you have a Fitbit, which is the watch that could count your steps, if you walk backwards, it is not going to deduct steps from your day. It's not going to take steps away. You are always moving, regardless of if it's forward or backwards, and it counts as a distance. So, if we look here, the absolute value of -2, this is sort of like an operation. I want you to think of this absolute value. We're finding the distance -2 is from 0. So if we look at this number line and we look at where -2 is, it is 2 units from 0. So 2 is the absolute value answer. Same thing here. Again, think of this as an operation. We are going to find the absolute value of 2. So here's 2. 2 is 2 units from 0. So the distance is 2. The absolute value is 2. Notice that even though these are two different problems, they equal the same answer because both of these numbers are the same distance from 0. And again, distance cannot be a negative number. Okay, so example 1. Find the absolute value of 3, use a number line. So again, we're going to get to the point where we're comfortable enough not to be using extra tools like number lines, but while we're learning it, it is important that we put in the effort and the background for each problem and learn how to show our work. So when we have an assessment or we need to explain something, we know how to do that. So 3, so I'm going to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll go into the negatives a little bit. So find the absolute value. This is what absolute value looks like. Now you have to be careful because absolute value can sometimes look like ones. So how far is 3 from 0? So here's 0. How many units did we cover? We cover 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. Now let's do this one. Find the absolute value of -2.5. Okay, so I'm going to have 0 up here because I know negative numbers are to the left of 0, and I'm going to count by halves. So -1/2, -1, -1.5, -2, -2.5, -3, -3.5. I think that's enough for us to be able to figure out our answer. Here is -2.5. Here is 0. Now we want to know how many units, full units, are in between -2.5 and 0. So here's 1 unit. Here's 2 units. And here is half of a unit. So the distance is the absolute value of -2.5 is 2.5 units. Okay, so what if we're asked to compare values? Now, remember, like I said before, absolute value is like an operation. It's asking you to do something. So we're trying to compare 2 and the absolute value of -5. Now, 2 is just a regular number. There's no absolute value symbol around it, so it's just 2. Here, what is the distance -5 is from 0? How many units? Well, it is 5 units. I know absolute value is not allowed to be negative because a distance can't be negative. So that means that 5 is greater than 2, which means the absolute value of -5 is greater than 2. Okay, now let's compare. we have the absolute value of 3.5 and -1. Okay, again, -1 is just a regular number. There's no absolute values, symbols around it. And absolute value of 3.5. How far is 3.5 from 0? It is 3.5 units. So now we decide which one is greater. 3.5 is greater than -1 because it's a positive compared to a negative, which means that the absolute value of 3.5 is greater than -1. Okay, example 3. The table shows the elevation of several animals. Which animal is the deepest? So I'm going to write what deepest means in this case. Deepest means furthest from 0 in a negative direction. So I'm explaining what I'm looking for. So now I look at my chart. I'm only going to look at the negative. So I'm going to look at shark, shrimp, and turtle, and I'm looking at which is the furthest from 0. -65 is the furthest from 0, so shrimp is our answer. Part B, is the shark or the sea lion closer to sea level? So this is all about the distance the animal is to sea level, or 0. We talked about sea level meaning 0, or ground level means 0. So let's see. The shark is -4, so the absolute value of -4 for the shark. And for the sea lion, we're going to do the absolute value of sea lion is 5. Okay, the absolute value of -4, the distance -4 is from 0 is 4 units. And the absolute value of 5, the distance 5 is from 0 is 5. So is the shark or the sea lion closer to sea level? The shark is closer to sea level. Because 4 is closer to 0 than 5.
All right, example 4. We have to simplify this expression. Now, when we simplify expressions, we follow PEMDAS. And we have a new term during these notes, absolute value, which I said we have to treat like an operation. So it needs to fit into PEMDAS somewhere. And it's going to fit in where we see parentheses. So absolute value is going to fit in where we see parentheses. So it's going to happen at the beginning of the problem. And if you see any operations inside of the absolute value, you have to do that first. For example, if we have the absolute value of 8 squared, you would have to do 8 squared first, which is 64, and then find the absolute value, which is just 64. When we get further into operations, you'll see more of that. So let's go ahead and get started on simplifying this expression. So I'm going to look at the parentheses here. I see that I have an absolute value on the inside. So I'm going to rewrite the absolute value of 5. The distance 5 is from 0 is 5 units. And then I also have an absolute value of -3. Now this minus sign on the outside just gets dropped directly down. We don't do anything with that. And the distance -3 is from 0 is 3 units. Now this is just a normal order of operations problem, so we continue following PEMDAS. 5 minus 2 is 3. Multiplication. Now we do addition from left to right. And our final answer is 28. So again, you want to take care of absolute value at the beginning of the problem. If there's any operations to do inside of the absolute value, you want to take care of that as well first. And that is the end of our section 8.4 notes.